Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro. It's time for us to give you our favorite movies of the year. It was a year of movies, it was a year of coronavirus, but more importantly, it was a year at the movies. So let's start out with some honorable mentions. Will you do the honors? My honors? The Rescue, The Humans, King Richard, The Green Knight, Power of the Dog, This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection, Quo Vadis Ida, The Last Duel, Saint Maud, Spencer, The Lost Daughter, Judas and the Black Messiah. As for my honorable mentions, La Fracture, nobody talked about that one after Cannes, and no one talked about it during Cannes except for me. The Last Duel, The Green Knight, Spencer, Don't Look Up because fuck you, Mitchell's vs. the Machines, The Humans, Tick Tick Boom, In the Heights, and Licorice Pizza. I really did think Licorice Pizza would end up in my top 10, but you're going to put it on your list and everyone's already talking about it, so I figured I'd throw love to something else. And that something else is This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. This is a film from Africa about a grieving woman in her 80s who fights for her community to not be displaced. It's basically about the existential horror of colonialism and how a world determined to progress, whatever that means, devalues these smaller communities. And it also sort of touches on like the myth of progress. Like, what does that even mean? If your progress like destroys everything that somebody values, like what is the progress? Stay out of my top 10, bitch. I don't have this in there, so I get to chime in on I get to chime in on this one. And in this movie, we definitely see how like this village has a rich history and stories worth telling and like a deep relationship with the land that they live on that people like me do not even understand. It made me very angry at how we devalue these communities and at the ongoing displacement of them. It's also stunningly well crafted. The cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. There's some really good sound design and music in here. The direction is very thoughtful and poetic, and we have a really great lead performance from Mary Twala, who actually passed very recently after this film. This is a slow burn for sure, and it's not for everybody. So if you want to watch this based on this recommendation, just kind of know what you're getting into. But it was a really memorable film for me because of how detached it was from the sort of Western perspective that we get with most movies. And even stylistically, I think that was reflected. Also, the ending is an absolute knockout. Like, that was what sold the movie for me. Number 10. Flee. A lot of these films are from Sundance, actually. Flee is an animated documentary about one refugee's journey to safety. It's a really harrowing portrait of something that so many people go through. Every year there's just an incredible amount of people who are displaced and need to find somewhere to go. And this film touches on the obstacles that somebody might face and also the psychological toll, like how dehumanizing that process is to find citizenship. It makes you reflect on like what the world is and how cruel of a place it is to those who don't have citizenship, who don't have a country they can belong to. And, you know, this just cannot be dismissed as like, oh, well, you just go live in your country. Like, people will literally die if they live in their country. Obviously, we know this is going on in Afghanistan right now. So this is a really important one to pick up for that healthy injection of empathy. It is riveting. It is stunningly animated. It will also be nominated for up to 3 Oscars. Number 9 is Saint Maud. For many, this is a 2020 film, but I watched it in 2021, so here it is. This is a brilliant psychological horror film, and it really fires on all cylinders. I remember watching this being like, my God, the cinematography, the sound design, the score, the editing, like everything is just so well crafted and well thought out. This main character is so goddamn strange. This weird, like, nut who's so invested in, like, her own personal religion. And it's a miracle that Morfydd Clark was able to make me buy this character, like, with such sincerity. You just look into her face and she's like, good. And it's like, Jesus. It's a very complex character too, and on a second watch, you really realize that so much of this movie is just about like her projecting her insecurities onto this woman that she's taking care of, whether that's her sexuality or her own selfishness. And I think of this as a cautionary tale about the dangers of interpreting the voice in your head as a divine presence. What a great launching point for a horror movie too, like that idea and exploring that. Stay the fuck out of my top 10. I will not be silenced. There's only really 1 or 2 scary parts in this horror film, but it still very much fits into the genre with its tone. And this one has a stunning ending, like actually left me completely stunned. The final, just 1 second, the final 1 second packs in so much that I can only just tell you to go see it for yourself. And it's existentially terrifying. And then the credits go and you're like, fuck. Horror movie of the year for me. Number 9, The Souvenir Part 2. The Souvenir Part 1, I believe, was number 10 on that year's list. And you know, what I love about this film is that in the same way that this character unentangles herself from this relationship in the first one. The second film, unentangle. Wow, I said unentangle. The second film untangles itself from the first. And the surprising thing was that this film was so enjoyable to me. Like, it was just bursting with joy and authenticity and sincerity. And that is why I love this film. I was simply watching this character on her filmmaking journey, discovering her own voice, discovering how to communicate with others. And Joanna Hogg's strength as a filmmaker is that she can explore her own history with utmost authenticity. You even get the cringy moments, the fumbling with how she's conveying her ideas as a director, and putting that all out there for everybody to see. Like, I went through film school as well. It connected with me on a personal level, made me reflect back on what that experience meant to me. And ultimately, I think the film's message is like a little bit obvious with how she's finding a voice through cinema, like, of course, but it was really like the journey and the filmmaking throughout, the performances and the naturalistic dialogue that roped me in, and it just completely had my heart throughout. Number 8 is Judas and the Black Messiah. Obviously, this one came out with, last year's awards season, but didn't release till 2021, and that's what matters here. It's at once a riveting crime saga and a reclamation of the legacy of Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party, which has been deliberately slandered for decades and skipped over in history classes. The movie also exposes the systems in place and the rhetoric that is used to discredit and take down these movements, and it's easy to see how that parallels what we're still seeing today. And it's movies like these that make you realize that the civil rights movements back then and the civil rights movements happening now had a lot of the same sort of conversations going on. Most importantly, the movie is faithful to Fred Hampton's politics and ideology, even as radical as they are. And it's especially sort of radical to see this presented in a Hollywood production, completely unwatered down, as a lot of retellings of US history and civil rights have been. And of course, this one also has, incredible performances from Dominique Fishback, Jesse Plemons, Lakeith Stanfield, and of course, Academy Award-winning performance from Daniel Kaluuya. Sean Bobbitt kills it as the DP. Can't wait to see where Shaka King goes next. Hopefully he doesn't get sucked up by the Marvel engine. Number 8 is Vortex. This is Gaspar Noé's sobering portrait of dementia and ultimately death. You will see it, I believe, come out this year, though right now there isn't even a trailer for it.
Or a release date, I'm not seeing.
Or a release date. It's a film I enjoyed thinking about more after I left the theater than when I was watching it. It is a slow film. It's kind of uncompromising in that you watch characters move about a space for like tens of minutes at times. Very minimalistic. But the really fascinating thing about it is that you're a spectator of two realities existing in the same space. A couple in an apartment, the screen is split between both of them. The way the camera moves around these hunched figures, the way that they are their own boxes, but they're also like sharing the screen, has a very dreamy, surreal quality to it, but at the same time, like, that is life itself. It makes my own reality seem very trippy, and the movie is also very interested in like the trippiness of life itself, especially in the third act. And what I also love about this is that while it is about dementia, it's about such a difficult subject, it doesn't point you to any conclusions about what you're supposed to make of it. We always want to find meaning in an experience like that. And it also rejects a comfortable interpretation of like what this movie is even supposed to mean, the bleakness of it all. And that is true to life itself. Like, I'm always kind of confused about what the fuck anything is supposed to mean anyway. It really opens up its viewers to, their own introspection about what life and death are. Can be a little pretentious, sure, but it was one of the most valuable cinematic experiences that I have had this year.
And my number 7 is also Vortex, so I'll try to not repeat all the things that you just said.
Okay, you can say the same thing.
I also love, like you were saying, how the movie doesn't try to assign any sort of meaning to itself, and it instead just presents life in this sort of split screen view. And I've seen people who just come away with this film feeling like the dread, and they say that there's really not much here to kind of enjoy or take away for them, and maybe it was just kind of a downer for them. But to me, there is something beautiful about the presentation. The split screen sort of implying this life that's shared together, even though we're not seeing this couple at, their prime. We're watching illness sort of separate them, and yet, like, they remain sort of together side by side. Also, just the role that the apartment itself plays in this film and how much of a character that becomes, as cliched as it sounds, even though my first reaction out of this movie was, I loved that, but I don't think I will watch it again. I'm kind of looking forward to it now. Also, I mean, the two lead performances are really great from Dario Argento and Francois Lebrun. And I love the sort of naturalistic improvised dialogue here. That was also very absorbing.
Number 7 is Summer of Soul. This film is about the Woodstock of Harlem that took place the same year Woodstock did.
With 3/4 the attendance. Nearly as big.
The whole kind of question it explores is, why do most of us not know about this? And what makes Woodstock worthy of talking about but not this? You know, the answer is kind of obvious. This took place in Harlem. The attendees were almost all black. And this film is about like the spirituality of music. It's an absolute jam. I cannot understate how enjoyable and fun this movie is. Seeing this panorama of talented musicians, all with their own styles, their own unique voices, and their kind of like souls coming out, and the audience just feeding into this. They also did an amazing job bringing the film stock itself to life. Like, it's so colorful here, and the audio quality is like amazing. What makes this film one of the best of the year is that not only is it this concert film, but they comment on the way that we understand events like this. Because white society failed to appreciate and acknowledge this event, which meant so much to the people who were attending it, it left them to wonder whether this was some sideshow, like to distract them from, you know, just protesting, which actually in part it was. And it points to something really sad about this country, which is that when something does feel like a step forward, often we look around after and we're like, oh, was it? Like, or are we just in the same place? There's a lot to appreciate in this documentary, and I am rooting for it to win the Oscar. Even though I know it won't, The Rescue will win the Oscar, which is also a very good movie, and I highly recommend that.
Summer of Soul could win the Oscar.
That'd be great, but I don't think it's going to win the Oscar over The Rescue.
And Summer of Soul is my number 6.
Wow, so in sync.
You know, often when we look back at Black history, we see a lot of struggle and suffering and like fighting for rights and all that. But we rarely look at the moments of joy. And Summer of Soul doesn't shy away from the struggles and the suffering that's been going on at the time. But it does show the other side of the coin, which is really important to look at. And the movie is celebrating some of the most iconic musicians of the time, the power that music has to bring community together and to energize people, to make them feel heard. A lot of the musical performances on display, you know, whether it's with the vocals or drummers and guitarists and trumpeters, they're so passionate. Like when I was watching the movie, I was thinking about the intimacy of these people's relationships to their instruments, or maybe, you know, to their vocal cords.
Oh.
It examines what the event meant to the community at the time and how it faded away from America's memory. And like Judas and the Black Messiah, it is a reclamation of that history. A really beautiful documentary that I would urge all to see, and I'm also hoping that it wins the Oscar.
Number 6 is Pig, which we both just rewatched. Pig absolutely did not disappoint second time around. This is a beautiful, bleak, minimalistic portrait of a man's quest for his pig, grief, capitalism, the quest for what makes life even worth it, and also the culinary arts. This is a really promising debut from Michael Sarnowski. I love that the scenes just speak for themselves and it never feels like he's telling you what to think, but there's so much to come away with at the same time, and it's communicated very clearly. Like, that is difficult to do. The writing for this film is something else. I was thinking throughout the film about how we commodify everything, like the pig being the best example of this, but that's like never stated that this is what's on the filmmaker's mind, but it's so obvious. And it's also not directly touched upon that this is a story about grief, but that is also pervasive. It slowly unfolds and reveals itself, and you know, it really does have a lot on its mind. My big takeaway here is, when we live in a society where everything is commodified, I think this film is exploring the impact that has on the human psyche. And it really puts you in a mood during those end credits. Very melancholy, but like, I love a good melancholy film. And an excellent performance from Nicolas Cage, which might be my favorite performance I've ever seen him give. It shows his tremendous range as an actor, and I love that he takes these naturalistic roles after he does like his bombastic stuff, because it shows you that the bombastic stuff is very intentional.
And my number 5 is Pig. You know, in addition to Nicolas Cage being really good, I did notice on the second watch how good Alex Wolff actually is here. As the character breaks down more and more, you understand like why the casting works perfectly. Whereas at first you're like, this is a weird casting choice. The script is so brilliantly minimal, and it's amazing how many profound ideas kind of bubble up out of this. It has a really good sense of pacing, and it knows when to slow down and let things simmer. The movie keeps its characters very limited, but nearly everybody who pops up here serves a very strong thematic purpose, whether that's, Alex Wolff's character or his father, or the very brief but brilliant performance by the guy who owns the restaurant who like breaks down laughing. And what this movie really gave me, especially on that first watch, was a big surprise. Not only because I didn't know what I was going to make of this movie going in, but the little surprises that I was being given along the way as the movie unfolded. And it's really only in that final moment where you fully understand what the whole thing was about. And that's the perfect way to end a movie because it gives you so much to digest afterwards.
My number 5 is Licorice Pizza. What this film did the best for me is it immerses you in a time and a place where anything is possible. And we're sort of left to wonder, is this a portrait of childhood? Is this a portrait of an America? Does this America exist? I love how tactile everything feels from the way it was shot on this film stock. Paul Thomas Anderson is always just delivering us visual eye candy, as well as really funny dialogue that goes back to some of his earlier work. I mean, Phantom Thread had a lot of fucking funny lines too. And I found it really enjoyable and meandering, kind of fun to just spend a couple hours in this world. Like, it was almost transfixing to me. There's such a simplicity to it that it allows you to get lost in it and just be like completely in the moment. But interestingly, it's kind of reminding you like to reflect on the moment at the same time and like think about what kind of context is this in at all. Like, it's fun to get lost in it and be just like this character Gary, where he just sees the next thing and goes towards it. But I do think there's a little bit more on the film's mind, and I do want to explore that in a second viewing, which I haven't done yet. But I was just so happy that we've been blessed with yet another great PTA film.
My number 4 film is Come On, Come On. This movie is just so lovely and warm and comforting. And I think it's because Mike Mills just knows how to make his characters come alive and feel real, obviously along with the actors. Something about the way that Mike Mills observes his subjects feels so appreciative. Like, even when his subjects are going through something tough, he's kind of reaching out to the audience and saying, don't we all go through this, and doesn't that make it beautiful? And he's equally in love with those little quirky, joyful moments. I love how every character has a sense of humor here, and if you really think about it, a lot of movies don't really give like senses of humor to their characters. Joaquin Phoenix and Woody Norman are an amazing duo. I could watch them all day, just interact with each other. I mean, Woody Norman especially, like, totally blew me away. Gabby Hoffman too. I think all these actors have amazing chemistry with each other. This movie sneak attacks your emotions all the time. There were moments where I teared up from just how charming and lovable it was. And there's also moments that are like kind of designed to hit you a little bit harder. And those moments are also really effective. I think the movie has the power to make you come out of the theater more appreciative of all the little moments in life and of the people that you cherish the most.
My number 4 is Come On, Come On. And it's one that I absolutely do reflect back on and hold it very close to me because it feels like it understands my experience. It is fundamentally about the bond between an adult and a child. As someone who does not have a child myself, it showed me what a kind of enriching experience that can be, how an adult does attempt to impart their knowledge onto a child, but the child's giving a lot back to them and really challenging them in new ways. And the film is really about the challenges that life just continually sets up for us and how we're constantly in the state of confusion about how to proceed. And I love that the film tells you we're all in this situation together. Like, nobody understands life if they're being honest, and it's okay to be confused about it. And that is why Come On, Come On has stuck with me. I did watch it twice, and I actually did like it a little less the second time because I wanted to see more from Joaquin Phoenix's character in terms of the backstory. I felt like that was missing. And sometimes I was so into the moments between Joaquin Phoenix and Woody Norman that I wanted more out of that. But those are kind of nitpicks. The connection that Joaquin Phoenix makes with Woody Norman is one of the most memorable on-screen relationships that I have seen. So passionate, so pure. Would recommend this film to nearly anybody.
Number 3 is Mass. I watched Mass again, and it got even better. The movie is a brutally honest examination of human beings' desire for catharsis and their need for answers in the face of senseless tragedies. And on the second viewing, I really picked up on how each individual character was searching for that catharsis and that meaning in a different way. And that made me appreciate the writing of the characters even more. And the movie comes at a time where our entire country is in a way traumatized by a series of senseless tragedies involving shootings, and a lot of people are searching for answers or fighting for change that might never come. This movie touches on that, but it also kind of acts as this antidote to like the political discourse surrounding shootings, where a lot of it is shaped by media or like the way that we argue online with people about this stuff. And here we have a movie that kind of hunkers down with four people who are the most deeply affected by the tragedy, and they have a face-to-face conversation about it. It's such a daring debut for Fran Kranz to make a movie that takes place in one location, and that's basically about four people dealing with the worst tragedy imaginable. But he never missteps, which is like a miracle. Like, he doesn't rely on any sort of cliches. This is one of the most powerful and moving films about grief that I've ever seen, and about forgiveness. And on the second viewing, the sort of climactic moment for Martha Plimpton's character really stood out to me in a way that I didn't even notice on the first viewing. What kind of leads her to this moment of acceptance of her situation and how she feels that she should move forward. I thought that was very profound and moving. And I think that moment will stick with me for a long time. The writing is like out of this world good. The performances, all four of them, are absolutely incredible. We know that they've been getting snubbed all year long by awards bodies, and all four of them deserve nominations. You really feel how each character is dealing with their own sort of frustration and ache and a desire to ease the pain. And the editing is also something I noticed on the second viewing was absolutely brilliant. I feel like if there was ever a class about reaction shots and how to use them in editing, this would be like a go-to movie for that curriculum. My number 3 is also Mass. I've probably recommended this more times than I can count since we keep talking about it in the context of awards and it never happens. But I did watch it again and it grew on me even more. This is an edge of your seat film for me because it's a conversation that feels real enough that I can really lean in and be like, oh, what kind of answers am I gonna get? I want each one of these characters to find what they're looking for. So when I see that like they're curious, like, what was your son like? Or I want to know like what happened that made this happen. Like, I also want to know what happened. And all of the answers that Fran Kranz writes into the script feel real enough that I buy it. And that's something that I'm kind of bewildered by. Like, how does a script give you answers that actually feel real and not just like forced or trying to make a point? I also saw in the second viewing how much this film is about faith and forgiveness, which wasn't obvious to me the first time. It's not just a movie about holding on to the pain of a tragedy, which we see in a lot of independent films. Like they really hold on to pain like very deeply. But it's about like how people move through pain. Reed Birney's performance also really stood out to me, and that he just so perfectly plays this reserved and conservative father who is trying to understand everything in like a very left brain way. Like in a way that I related to. Like I didn't even feel detached from that character. Like, that made a lot of sense to me that is how a person might come to terms with such an atrocity. Every performance here holds up phenomenally well. In a just world, they'd all receive acting nominations, and I agree that the editing stood out a lot too. They always know who's asking the questions and who's receiving the answers. It's always very in tune with that. And stunningly, the film is engaging even though it's a conversation with four people. And that is actually not easy to pull off. Like, when you have four people at a table, like, your cinematography becomes very complicated, like how you're supposed to shoot that. And really, like, this film came down to understanding like who is talking to who at each time, who is important to look at during this line, who's important to look at during that line. There's a lot of engineering that goes into that, and this film did it excellently. Would love if everybody could check this out, and they can. And they can. My number 2 movie of the year is The Worst Person in the World. This movie feels like most personal to me out of anything released this year. And I think it will have that effect on a lot of people who are like in their 20s, or maybe of any age. It celebrates the emotional highs and lows that come with indecisiveness. In that period of life where you're supposed to know what you want to do, and yet your heart and your brain are being tugged in all sorts of unpredictable directions. I love the writing of the characters in this film because it's rare that you get a sort of love triangle where you're not really rooting for any specific outcome. You just want happiness for all three characters involved. And you grow to love them and all their flaws and all their complications because that only makes them more relatable and more human. This film is also so inventive as a drama. Like there's some fantastical sequences in here, some riveting conversations, especially between Renate Reinsve and Anders Danielsen Lee, who deliver some of the best performances of the year. If we're judging performances by the extent to which they can rip your heart out, I think these two should be nominated for Oscars. There are a lot of moments in this film that just feel so real and truthful that it hurts. I especially felt like the breakup scene was like a personal attack to me. I love how it's presented in these 12 chapters that feel very distinct. So many of them are just so absorbing. The one on cheating, the one where everything like freezes. And ultimately, I think this movie really captures something about this sort of generation of, I don't know if you want to call it like a millennial or a Gen Z thing. It's about millennials, but I think it's going to persist. Where the paths that people choose in their 20s are sort of changing, and your 20s are not just necessarily about figuring out how to hunker down with somebody so that you can have kids, which is kind of great, and it leads to like these freedoms, but it's also leading to all this confusion. The movie really speaks to like this never-ending journey of self-discovery, and the movie is just comforting in its own existence and saying like that's okay that we're like this. By the way, I didn't hand out any 10s this year, but this, Mass, and the number 1 are 10 out of 10s, just for the record.
Number 2 for me, you probably do not see coming because you forgot that I did not see this movie last year, and it is The Father. This is a devastating, realistic, and intimate portrait of dementia. It's grounded by an extremely vulnerable performance from Anthony Hopkins, who I do not think this film would have worked nearly as well without him, especially in the last scene when he just absolutely broke me. It's one of the performances I think of when I think of one of the best performances ever that I've ever seen. It's a film that grounds you in the struggles of someone who's going through that. And I love how they show his intelligence and how he feels that he is coming across very intelligently to the people around him, and he just watches those pieces are taken away from him, and he's just reduced to this creature that is like calling out for his mommy, where he's just so fearful and uncertain of anything around him. It shows how awful this disease can be. And I'm like, I don't know why I like that. Like, why does that make it my number 2 of the year? I don't know. It was just so powerful. It was such a powerful deconstruction of that. And it put me so intimately in his shoes that I was moved. And if a movie moves me that deeply, it gets right up there in my top 10. I've not forgotten about this film, even though I saw it in March.
And the number 1 film of the year for me is Titan. This movie was so goddamn riveting. Like, this pumped my veins full of cinema. Both times I'd seen this movie, I was on a high for days. I was just like, oh my God, like movies are so good. Like this is what movies can be. The movie's a roller coaster that will put you in a state of awe and shock and give you surprise after surprise. But the biggest surprise of all is this movie, which starts out so brutal, happens to be a movie about unconditional love and belonging. And on a second viewing, it's about ideas that I think go even deeper than that. It's about our evolving relationship with social categories and the constraints that they put on us with categories like gender and sexuality. Julia Ducournau's vision for this movie is like unmatched. Like, I'm just stunned that it exists. I'm like, who thought of this? And I loved that I was able to sort of dive in and pick it apart, because the first time I saw it, I loved it, but I was like, if I watch this again and again, will I be able to get something out of it? Like, will it make sense? Will it fit together? And the answer to that is in my 14-minute analysis video of this movie, which is a video that I'm pretty proud of, and it took me way too long to do. So you can go watch that if you want like really in-depth analysis of this movie. But just the fact that I went out and created that, like that speaks to how much I love this movie. But ultimately, it's Ducournau's focus on these two characters. It's never just a movie about like ideas and things like this. It's always about how these characters are evolving throughout the story, how they're coming together, and they're coming together from like the most unlikely places. Like they are the strangest people, and yet they come together and form like the deepest relationship. This movie has beautiful dancing sequences. It actually made me emotional. That is not something that I was expecting in the first third of this movie, that it would make me feel that way. Agathe Roussel and Vincent Lindon deliver some of the most daring, deeply committed, and emotionally involved performances of the year. And if it were up to me, it'd be getting nominated for like cinematography and editing and all this great stuff. Ducournau should be like winning director. That's a conversation for another day. It's a conversation for one of our videos coming up, where we're gonna say what we would nominate
nominate for all the categories that the Oscars do, or most of them.
But yeah, I'm just a huge fan of this movie, and you can, go.
My number one is also Teton, which I've not talked about on camera, actually, if you think about it.
Oh yeah,
you saw it at Cannes, and then you did the analysis video, and I've kept my mouth shut. I have seen it twice. It holds up very, very well. Like, I could talk about, like, post-humanism and, like, why it's, interesting about gender, but that's not why I like the film. That's not why I have this, like, affinity for it. Maybe it's because it's so fucking bizarre. It's just so out there. Its imagination is just running so wild. It's thrashing me in directions that I would not ever expect to go, and it's combining different elements in the same melting pot. As a cinema fan, I was completely riveted. And no other film has done that this year. I can't even think of that many films that are just this level of unique and exciting. Like, I'm seeing something completely new in a vision that I haven't experienced. As a theme park ride, this was, like, amazing.
The Scorsese definition of that?
Yeah. Okay. If Marvel movies were like this kind of ride, this is like my highest form of entertainment. Especially the second time watching it and, like, kind of knowing the twists are coming, but still being, like, shook by them. I mean, I like that it's like 3 movies in one. But I wouldn't love it. I would probably just like it, admire it, if it weren't for the fact that one of these twists, like you said, is really grounded in, like, a deeply, like, pure, wholesome contrast to, like, all this other crazy shit going on, which is that it's about this character who is in many ways, like, so closed off, so unlovable, who is washed in a white light in the end. And Vincent Lindon, easily, like, one of the best performances this year. To watch him as this juiced, hulked up beast, almost, like, transform this metallic, hardened, cold woman. For him also to be, like, so solidified in his masculinity, and to have, like, those two collide and then transform her, it hits me, like, kind of deep in the gut. And the end makes me tear up, okay? Like, I know people are like, the fuck? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, there's like a single tear. Another thing I want to mention is that the direction in this film is stunning, because for so much of it, you don't hear any dialogue. So many of these scenes are so evocative and beautiful, and they're just showing you something, like, in the most pure way, whether it's through, like, characters and their movement and their dance. This film, if nothing else, is just about the human body. I've also just never seen, like, bodies photographed like this. The grotesqueness and, like, the intimacy of, like, the characters, inhabiting these bodies that are transforming and becoming foreign. And then on top of that, like, just more, like, decoration on the cake, some sprinkles. It's interesting as, like, a post-human film to think about how intimate our relationship with technology is, and then to see a film sexualizing machines. Like, how much do we look at bodies as these sort of, like, mechanical creations, like how we'd see a body in a magazine and it's very, like, perfect and polished, and then how much do we look at machines and, like, anthropomorphize them, like cars. I think cars look kind of like people, and a lot of them are supposed to look sexy.
They look like hamsters.
And it's like a masculine thing to, like, have a sexy car, which is really, like, it's just bizarre. And then this film, like, reframes that. It reframes all these things about, like, the human body, its relationship to machines, and then, like, the non-binary, no genderism that is, like, us at our most fundamental form.
And those are our top 10 films of 2021. Thank you for joining us on this year of amazing movies. What was your favorite movie of the year?
She also likes Teton. We took her to see In the Heights.
She feels like Olga Meredith is not getting the recognition that she deserves. It's okay. We feel that way about the actors from Mass and Teton and The Worst Person in the World and Pig. And come on. Yeah, this year, the Best Picture lineup wasn't full of my faves, And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
But more than the Oscars, I care about seeing good movies. Getting, like, the international films in there, getting the indie films in there. I probably didn't even do all my due diligence with international films, and, and I apologize for that.
It's alright, you don't have to end this video on an apology.
I don't want to apologize for anything at all, because I never should apologize for being me.
Only if being you is causing harm to others, which is something else to evaluate. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
What's your top 10 animals?